Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a subject that I think feels incredibly familiar to most of you listening. Yet somehow we usually get it completely wrong.
Yeah, we really do.
We're looking at the man who is universally cited as the father of modern economics. I mean, if you've ever debated the price of groceries or, worried about inflation or just had a job, you are basically living inside the architecture he described. We are talking about Adam Smith.
A truly monumental figure. And you're right, he is often just kind of reduced to a bumper sticker. The capitalism guy.
Exactly, yeah. He's the face on the 20-pound note, the sort of patron saint of greed is good.
Right.
But that's exactly the tension I want to explore today, because looking at this comprehensive dossier we have, which, by the way, includes his bio, his two massive books, and his personal correspondence, that reputation just doesn't hold up.
It really doesn't.
It almost seems like the popular version of Adam Smith is the exact opposite of the actual man.
It's a caricature. Honestly, if you actually read the source material rather than just, the quotes people post online, you find a very different thinker.
Totally.
Smith wasn't primarily a number cruncher. He was a moral philosopher. He was just deeply obsessed with how human beings, who, yes, can be selfish, how they manage to live together in a society without just tearing each other apart.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just going to talk about money. We're unpacking the mind of a thinker who published his economic masterpiece in 1776.
Same year as U.S. independence, actually.
Right, exactly. And we want to show you why his ideas on empathy are just as crucial as his ideas on profit.
Absolutely.
We have a lot to cover. We've got the theory of moral sentiments, the wealth of nations, and his surprisingly sharp take on the role of government and education.
It's a really comprehensive look. We essentially need to bridge the gap between Smith the philosopher and Smith the economist.
So let's start with his origins. Because he didn't write in a vacuum, right? He was a product of the Scottish Enlightenment. And I feel like we often skip over how significant that specific time and place was.
Oh, it was incredibly significant. You have to imagine Scotland in the mid-18th century. It was just this explosion of intellectual activity.
Oh, the real golden age.
Exactly. Yeah, David Hume, Adam Ferguson, James Watt. It was this small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, and they were all just constantly debating the nature of man and society.
And Smith was born right into the middle of this, in Kirkcaldy in 1723.
Right. And he goes to the University of Glasgow at age 14.
Which sounds crazy young to us now.
Yeah, but it was actually pretty standard back then. And there he studies under Francis Hutcheson.
And Hutcheson is a key figure here, right? Because the dossier mentions he's the one who taught Smith about civil liberty.
Yes, the idea that people should be free to make their own choices, that really planted a seed. But the real contrast, the real culture shock for Smith comes when he leaves Scotland.
Oh, right. He goes to Oxford.
On a scholarship, yeah. And he absolutely hated it.
I was reading his letters from that time in the dossier. You expect Oxford to be this pinnacle of rigorous intellectual debate, but Smith found it completely stagnant.
He really did.
He famously complained that the professors had, and this is a direct quote, abandoned even the appearance of teaching.
Wow. Yeah, and the thing is, it wasn't just a petty complaint. It was a systemic critique. Well, at Oxford, the professors were paid from an endowment. They got their money, regardless of whether they taught well or honestly, even if they showed up at all.
Oh, wow. So there was no incentive.
Exactly. Whereas in Glasgow, part of a professor's pay came directly from student fees.
If you're a bad teacher, students don't pay to take your class.
Right. So Smith saw firsthand that without incentives, without a clear connection between effort and reward quality, just drops. It was a very early, very practical lesson in economics.
That makes so much sense. So he eventually leaves Oxford, goes back to Scotland, and lands a job that really changes his trajectory. He becomes a tutor for the young Duke of Buccleuch.
The Grand Tour.
Right, the classic 18th century finishing school for wealthy aristocrats.
Yeah, you travel around Europe, see the sights, meet important people. But for Smith, this was a golden opportunity. It meant he got to spend years in France and Switzerland.
And he meets Voltaire.
And crucially, he meets the physiocrats.
Now, the physiocrats are fascinating. They were basically the leading economists of the day in France, but they had this one massive hang-up. They believed all value came from the land.
Right, that agriculture was the only true source of wealth.
They thought merchants and manufacturers were, I think the word they used was sterile.
Yes, sterile.
Yeah.
Because they argued that merchants just moved things around. They didn't actually create anything new from the earth.
And Smith debated them on this.
He did. He respected that they were trying to build a logical economic system, but he totally disagreed with their core premise. He was starting to formulate this idea that labor-human effort across all sectors, not just farming, was the real engine of wealth.
But before he could fully articulate that idea, the one that would become the wealth of nations, he had to lay down some fundamental groundwork about human nature.
Exactly.
Which brings us to 1759. Before he is ever known as the capitalism guy, he publishes a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
And honestly, if you only know Adam Smith for The Invisible Hand, this book is a total curveball.
It really is. It's an entire book about conscience.
Yes. And a lot of modern scholars argue that you cannot actually understand his economics without understanding this book first.
Because in Moral Sentiments, Smith is asking a really basic question. If humans are naturally self-interested, why do we ever do anything nice?
Right. Why do we care about other people at all?
And his answer isn't, fear of going to hell or the government forcing us to be nice. His answer is sympathy.
But we have to be careful here, because he defines sympathy a bit differently than how you or I might use the word today.
Right. It's not just feeling bad for someone who's down on their luck.
No, it's a lot more technical than that. For Smith, sympathy is the innate human capacity to share passions. It's a psychological mirroring mechanism.
Like when I see you stub your toe, I physically wince.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Or when you see someone genuinely overjoyed, you feel a little lift yourself. Smith argued that we have a natural, hardwired desire to be in tune with the people around us.
We want their approval.
We crave their approval. We want to share in their emotions, and we want them to share in ours. It's the social glue.
And this leads to my absolute favorite concept of his from the dossier, the impartial spectator.
It's such a brilliant idea.
It sounds a bit like a ghost story, but it's actually this profound psychological tool. How would you explain it?
Well, Smith suggests that as we grow up and interact with people, we internalize society's judgments. We basically create this imaginary figure inside our own heads, the impartial spectator.
An inner voice.
Right. And before we take an action, we subconsciously ask ourselves, if a totally neutral, disinterested stranger were watching me right now, would they approve of what I'm about to do?
So it's the ultimate mechanism for self-regulation.
Precisely.
Like, I don't punch the guy who cuts me off in traffic, and it's not just because a cop might see me and arrest me. It's because the impartial spectator in my head says, hey, that's an overreaction. That's embarrassing.
Exactly. That internal dialogue is what creates ethics. It's what creates social harmony. We moderate our behavior to align with this internal judge long before any real laws or governments get involved.
So Smith establishes that humans are these deeply moral social creatures who constantly seek validation.
Right.
And only then, 17 years later in 1776, he drops the wealth of nations.
Which can seem like a huge contradiction to people at first glance.
Yeah, because he goes from saying we care deeply about sharing the passions of others to writing his most famous quote, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest."
It definitely looks like a contradiction, but it's actually just a division of domains.
What do you mean by that?
Well, moral sentiments explains how we deal with our family, our friends, our close neighbors, people we actually know.
The people where that mirroring mechanism actually triggers.
Exactly. But the wealth of nations explains how we deal with strangers.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. I can rely on benevolence and sympathy from my best friend, but I can't rely on the benevolence of a baker I have never met, living on the other side of a city of 50,000 people.
Right. You don't have a personal connection with the baker, so how do you get him to wake up at 4 in the morning to bake bread for you?
You appeal to his self-interest. You pay him.
Exactly. And that is where the invisible hand comes in.
Okay, let's really get into this. Because the invisible hand has to be the most misunderstood metaphor in all of economics.
Oh, without a doubt. People treat it like it's magic, or some kind of divine force that just makes everything perfect.
But looking at the sources, it's not magic at all. It's just a description of a feedback loop. Unintended consequences.
Let's unpack the mechanism. Because Smith was really describing a signal processing system. Let's use the shoe example from the dossier.
Perfect. So imagine a village.
And suddenly, this village needs more shoes. Maybe winter's coming. So the demand for shoes is high, but the supply is low.
What happens next? The price goes up.
The price goes up.
Yeah.
And that high price acts as a signal. It's a flare going up in the market.
It signals to the shoemakers, hey, there's profit to be made over here.
Right. So the existing shoemakers start working longer hours. Maybe a few carpenters realize they can make more money making shoes, so they switch trades.
And they aren't doing this because they love the villagers and want them to have warm feet.
Not at all. They're doing it entirely for the profit. That's their self-interest.
But the result of their self-interest is that the village gets the shoes it desperately needs.
Exactly. And as more shoemakers enter the market to chase that profit, the supply of shoes goes up.
Which means the price eventually has to come back down.
Right. Competition drives the price down to a normal level. The society gets what it needs at the lowest possible price without a king or a central planner ever ordering anyone to make a single shoe.
And that right there is the invisible hand.
That's it.
By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it.
It's order from chaos. And this is a massive chaos. But Smith knew that this whole system relied entirely on one thing: productivity.
Which brings us to perhaps his second most famous idea, the division of labor.
The engine of wealth.
And to explain this, he uses the famous pin factory example. And I just love the granularity of this in the text. He doesn't just say, oh, factories are faster. He doesn't just say, oh, factories are faster. He actually breaks down the workflow step by step.
He really does. He starts by noting that a single person, working alone, trying to make a metal pin from scratch.
Right. Mining the ore, smelting it, pulling it.
Yeah, stretching the wire, cutting it, sharpening the point, making the little head to put on top. A single guy might make one pin a day. Maybe 20 if he's incredibly skilled.
Which is obviously a terrible use of time.
But then Smith visits a specialized factory, and he sees that the process of making a pin has been divided into about 18 distinct operations.
One man draws out the wire.
Another straightens it.
A third cuts it. A fourth points it.
A fifth grinds it at the top for receiving the head.
And what's the result of breaking it down like that?
Well, the output shifts from 20 pins a day for one guy to something like 48,000 pins in a day for a small team of 10 men.
That is just staggering. 48,000.
It is the birth of the modern world right there.
And Smith points out 3 specific benefits to this division of labor.
Right. First is increased dexterity. If your only job, all day, every day, is just to cut wire, you are going to get incredibly fast and precise at cutting wire.
You become a micro-expert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second is time saved. You aren't constantly putting down the wire cutters to go pick up the grinding stone. You stay at your station.
No transition time.
Right. And the third benefit is innovation.
Because if you're the guy just turning a crank all day, you're eventually going to figure out a way to hook that crank up to a water wheel so you don't have to do it anymore.
Yes, exactly. Workers and engineers invent machines to handle the boring, repetitive parts. This explosion in productivity is what allows for what Smith called universal opulence.
It makes everyday goods cheap enough that even the poorest members of society can actually afford them.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
But there is a catch.
Yes. The dark side of the division of labor. And this is a crucial nuance that usually gets completely left out of the modern eulogies for Adam Smith.
It really does. People want to paint him as this uncritical cheerleader for industry. But he wasn't blind to what this kind of hyper-specialized work did to a human being.
Not at all. He actually issued a really stark warning in the text.
He argued that a man whose whole life is spent performing a few simple operations, like just cutting a wire, over and over again for 40 years, that man has no occasion to exert his understanding.
He doesn't have to think.
Right. His brain just isn't being challenged.
The quote in the source material is honestly brutal. He says that such a worker becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become.
It's intense. He saw it as a form of mental mutilation. Smith realized that while the division of labor makes the nation incredibly rich, it can completely destroy the minds of the individual workers. It creates this terrible mental torpor.
So what was his solution? Because this is where the whole strictly anti-government narrative about Smith completely breaks down. He didn't just shrug and say, well, that's the free market for you.
No, not at all. He said the state must step in.
The government?
Yes. Because the market caused this specific problem, the market has no incentive to fix it. So Smith advocated for public education.
State-funded education.
At least partially state-funded, yes. To counteract the mental stupor of factory life. He believed the government actually had a moral duty to ensure the working population remained mentally active and capable of critical thought.
That is such a perfect segue into his overall view on the role of government.
Yeah.
Because we have to remember what Smith was fighting against. He was writing to tear down a specific economic system called mercantilism.
Right. Mercantilism was the operating system of Europe at the time. And the core belief was very simple. Wealth equals gold.
Literally just hoarding precious metals.
Exactly. The idea was that if England has more gold in its national vault than France has in its vault, then England is winning.
So the entire national strategy was to export as many goods as possible to get gold in return, and to heavily tax or block imports so you don't leak any gold out.
It was viewed as a totally zero-sum game. High tariffs, state-granted monopolies, massive trade barriers.
And Smith looks at this and basically says, this is ridiculous.
He thought it was absurd. He argued that a nation isn't rich just because a king have a pile of yellow metal sitting in a dungeon.
Right.
A nation is rich if its people have a high standard of living, if they have abundant clothes, food, shelter, and consumer goods.
And this leads to his argument for free trade and absolute advantage, which is basically, if a foreign country can sell us something cheaper than we can make it ourselves, we should just buy it from them.
Yes, it's common sense applied to nations. If we try to grow grapes and make wine in Scotland, we'd have to use heated greenhouses. It would be incredibly expensive and terribly inefficient.
The wine would cost a fortune and probably taste terrible.
Exactly. So Smith says we should stick to what we are actually good at. Maybe raising sheep for wool or manufacturing hardware. We sell that to the French and we buy their cheap wine.
And at the end of the day, both the Scottish and the French end up with more stuff at a lower cost.
Everyone wins. But to really dismantle mercantilism, Smith had to define what value actually was. He had to solve the water versus diamond paradox.
Oh, I remember this from Econ 101. But seeing Smith's original take on it in the dossier is really interesting.
What a great thought experiment. He makes a distinction between value in use and value in exchange.
Right. So water has massive value in use. You literally die without it. It's the most useful thing on Earth.
But it has almost no value in exchange. It's essentially free, or at least very cheap.
And diamonds are the exact opposite.
Right. Diamonds have practically zero value in use. You can't eat them. You can't build a house with them. But their value in exchange is massive. They are incredibly expensive.
So how does Smith resolve the paradox? He links value to labor, right?
He does. He argues that the real price of everything, what everything really costs to the person who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it.
The effort.
Exactly. You can walk down to a stream and scoop up water with almost no effort. It takes zero toil.
But finding a diamond, mining it out of the earth, cutting it perfectly, that takes a massive amount of human labor.
So labor is the ultimate currency. And wealth grows when we save.
Yes, the accumulation of capital. The dossier mentions he focuses a lot on parsimony, or savings.
Right. When people save their money instead of just consuming everything they produce, those savings become capital. And that capital is what is used to hire more workers and buy better machines, which creates more wealth.
And he divides this system into three main classes of people, right?
Yes. You have the workers, who receive wages for their labor. You have the landowners, who receive rent for their land. And you have the capitalists, the employers, who receive profit for risking their capital.
Okay, so if human labor creates value, and the division of labor multiplies that value exponentially, and free trade lets us exchange it all efficiently,
yes,
we obviously need a robust system to protect all of this activity.
We do. And Smith was very clear on this. He was not an anarchist. He believed the government, that sovereign was absolutely necessary, and he outlined three distinct duties for it.
Okay, duty number one, defense.
Right. You need an army and a navy. You have to protect the society from the violence and invasion of other independent societies. That's basic survival.
Duty number two, justice.
This is incredibly crucial for capitalism. A free economy relies entirely on contracts and property rights.
Right, because if I can just steal the shoes you made, or if I refuse to pay you for them and you have no recourse, the whole market collapses.
Exactly. The impartial spectator we talked about earlier is great for keeping you polite at a dinner party. But for complex business transactions, you need an objective court system to enforce the rules and protect citizens from injustice.
And the third duty, which we touched on a bit with the public education, is public works.
And this is honestly the most pragmatic, modern part of Smith's thought. He explicitly recognized that there are certain things that are highly valuable to a society, but that will never be profitable for a private business to build.
Like roads and bridges.
Roads, bridges, canals, harbors, basic schooling. A private company isn't going to build a paved road to a remote farming village because the tolls they could collect would never cover the cost of construction.
It's a bad investment for a private company.
Right. But that road absolutely needs to exist for the farmers to get their goods to market, which makes the whole nation wealthier.
So the government has to step in and build it.
Yes. The sovereign must use taxes to build and maintain these institutions. He's essentially describing modern infrastructure investment.
It's amazing. He's identifying market failure way back in 1776, before we even had a term for it.
She saw the whole board.
Now, I want to get to the twist, because I think this is the most surprising part of the whole dossier.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Right. Because if you ask people today who Adam Smith was rooting for, who the hero of his story is, almost everyone would say it's the business owners, the capitalists.
But the source material paints a very, very different picture.
It really does. Smith was actually deeply suspicious of merchants and manufacturers.
He didn't see them as heroes at all. He saw them as a powerful special interest group that constantly tried to rig the system.
There is that famous scathing quote about what happens when businessmen get together.
Yes. He wrote, "People of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion. But the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices."
I mean, that is just brutal. He is basically saying, if you leave these corporate guys alone in a room together, they aren't going to brainstorm how to innovate. They're going to plot how to price fix.
Correct. Smith profoundly understood that the interest of the capitalist is often directly opposed to the interest of the public.
How so?
Well, the public wants low prices and high competition. That's how we get cheap shoes and universal opulence.
Yeah.
But the capitalist wants high prices and a total monopoly so they can secure guaranteed profits without working so hard.
So they hate competition.
They hate it. And Smith explicitly warned that any new law or regulation proposed by businessmen ought always to be listened to with the greatest possible suspicion.
Because they have an inherent incentive to deceive the public.
Exactly. He said it comes from an order of men whose interest is never exactly the same with that of the public, who have generally an interest to deceive and even to oppress the public.
Wow. So to sum it up, the father of capitalism was fiercely pro-market, but deeply anti-business.
That is the absolute perfect way to put it. He was pro-market because the free market disciplines the businessman. Pure competition forces him to lower his prices and serve the consumer.
But if that businessman can lobby the king or the government to get a special monopoly or a protective tariff, he escapes that discipline.
Right, he gets to cheat. Smith wanted to fiercely protect the mechanism of competition, not the bank accounts of the specific competitors.
It really complicates the modern narrative, doesn't it? We tend to think of economics today as this dry, hyper-mathematical field, or just a team sport for politicians.
Yeah.
But reading Smith, he seems to be constantly trying to balance all these massive, competing human forces. Empathy versus self-interest, labor versus capital, government intervention versus individual freedom.
Because he was a holistic thinker. You really can't separate the moral philosopher from the economist. You can't separate moral sentiments from wealth of nations.
They are two halves of the same worldview.
Exactly. He genuinely believed that a society made up of purely selfish, greedy people simply couldn't function. It would just evolve into a cage match. The free market only works because it is embedded inside a moral society.
A society where people actually have that sympathy we talked about earlier.
Right, and where the law and the government step in to prevent the worst abuses and build the things we all need.
So when we look around at the modern world today, global supply chains, massive multinational corporations, complex algorithmic trade deals, it is incredibly easy to just feel overwhelmed by it all.
Oh, absolutely.
But Smith gave us a really enduring framework to analyze it.
He teaches us to look straight at the incentives. When a new policy is proposed, Smith trains us to ask, who actually benefits from this?
When a corporate merger happens, ask, where is the competition going?
Exactly. And most importantly, he constantly reminds us that the ultimate goal of an economy isn't just to make a chart go up or to hoard gold in a vault. The true goal is the wealth of nations.
The widespread prosperity of everyday people.
Exactly that.
Well, that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, something to mull over as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
We've established today, through the source material, that Adam Smith firmly believed the government has a duty to address the negative side effects of the market.
Like the mental stupor from the pin factory.
Right. And he believed the state has to build the critical infrastructure that the private market ignores.
Yes.
So if Adam Smith were somehow transported to today and he looked at our current economic systems, if he looked at our gig economy, our modern education system, our infrastructure, corporate lobbying, how do you think he would grade us?
Oh, man.
That is the question.
Would he look at us and say, we've let the invisible hand run completely wild without the impartial spectator watching over it? Or would he say we've strangled the very productivity and free trade that makes wealth possible in the first place?
Exactly. Are we actually keeping the careful balance he prescribed? I suspect if he read the news today, he'd have some very sharp critiques for both sides of the modern political aisle.
I suspect you're right. Honestly, he'd probably tell us we've abandoned even the appearance of understanding him.
He just might. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
No te vayas del video antes de comentar, suscribirte o darle like. Recuerda que estamos en TikTok, Instagram y YouTube.